G'day guys, Ziggy D here. Welcome back for my Day 2 recap of Blizzcon Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls. This is actually going to be a part 1 of 2 because they covered quite a few things today and I want to go into a little bit more detail with the two sections of information they talked about in the panel. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the panel's focus on the Crusader and other class changes. They also talked about itemization and loot 2.0, so I'll talk about that in the next video, so make sure to stick around for that. But overall, I have to say, it looks like the game is still quite a ways off. They didn't really reveal everything that we've had data mined, and they weren't willing to talk about some things yet. So, based on this and the lack of, an announcement of any sort of beta, I'm suspecting that things are getting pushed back by quite a bit. So we might not even see a beta maybe until the start of next year, or I don't expect we'll see one this year anymore. So some people might be disappointed about that. I am selfishly not too disappointed about that. I'm actually kind of pleased because I'm really enjoying the Path of Exile action at the moment, and hopefully, if there's some delays to Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls, I'll be able to get up and get set up streaming before that comes around, and I'll be able to stream the beta and all that jazz for you guys. So I'm looking forward to that, but that's kind of selfish. It would be nice if they could get the beta out this year, but we'll see. Not looking so good yet. But that's the bad news. Let's get that out of the way and talk about actually what they talked about in regards to the Crusader and class changes coming in Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls. So first up, they focused on the Crusader, and they talked about him for about 20 or so minutes, and it was pretty in-depth look at the Crusader and how they designed the Crusader, look at some of his different skills and animations and things like that. It was pretty cool. I actually really enjoyed this segment, and I got some tingles when they showed off like how they went through the process of coming up with the artwork and things like that for the Crusader. I have to admit, it was pretty exciting to see, and I'm getting more and more psyched to play this class myself. So first up, they talk about the core design concepts of the Crusader. They kind of have these three pillars of what they wanted the class to be. It's a battle-scarred knight, so he's a bit darker than the paladins, he's a bit darker, he's out there, he's getting gritty, he's getting dirty and doing all that, clearing out of demons. Next up, he's powered by righteous wrath, and this feeds into the power system, his wrath system, and also a lot of his abilities. So he kind of is super angry at all of these demons everywhere, and he can pull that out and channel that into different abilities and stuff like that. And thematically, that's pretty cool as well, and it suits the raw power of a lot of his build, a lot of his skills and things like that, focusing all of this wrath into like explosive powers, which is pretty cool stuff. And then finally, he's a war machine made human. So they talked about something like an Abrams tank, this really blocky, tanky, thick, strong, but kind of, medium-ranged character. So he's a tanky melee character, but he plays at melee medium range a lot. So a lot of his melee abilities have a little bit of range on them. He uses his weapon itself is like a flail, and a lot of his abilities allow him to either teleport himself or fire from a bit of a distance, call down artillery bombardments, things like that. Kind of that tank theming. And I really like how all of this is coming together, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play. And then finally, something that I really enjoy is that the shield is super central and important to his character. When they were going through the artwork design process for the Crusader, they really focused on the shield as like the center point. It was almost like the Crusader himself was standing off to the side a little bit with his shield right in the middle. And it's not just a defensive item for him, it's like bigger and more damaging than his actual flail. The flail is supplementary to the shield, and a lot of his abilities feed into that. There's a lot of shield attacking sort of abilities, which is really cool, because historically, I like to say this, the shield was not just a defensive piece of equipment, it was very offensive. It was used to attack, it was used to great effect in many battles throughout history, and it's really cool to see this represented and reflected in a character like this. The Crusader using the shield to devastating power is pretty exciting and getting me more and more hyped to play this character. So we also got to look at some of the in-game armor sets for the Crusader. I was a little bit sad that in that screenshot they showed us, there wasn't like the thematic one that he's done in the artwork, but I think there's a lot more than what they just showed on this screenshot. But nonetheless, it was pretty cool to see the progression of him kind of in rags at the start, like a lot of the characters. Before he gets all his sick armor, he's actually pretty much just wearing normal clothing, and it's pretty cool to see the progression there, so I'll make sure to throw that up on screen for you guys. Next up, they talked about animating the class and giving him a look and feel that supports these core design concepts that I talked about, the battle-scarred knight, the powered by righteous wrath, and a war machine made human. So on that note, we got to look at some of the new skill animations in a fair bit of detail, even the design process for them. Like they talked about some skills that didn't work out, some that didn't feel very good, or changes they made to make the skills feel better. So some of the skills we saw that are actually going into the game and we got to look at, and I'll make sure to put these up on screen for you guys. The first one was Shield Bash, and this really suits the feel of the Crusader's Wrath. You know, he kind of like hunches back, draws all this power out and channels it through his shield, like putting this force wave through the enemies, and it's pretty cool looking. We got to look at that with one of the melee attacks as well on some little test dummy enemies there, and they played that out in slow motion as well, and then in regular speed, and it feels pretty weighty. It looks like a pretty good skill to play with. Next up, we've got to look at Justice and Blessed Shield, which is kind of this combo of a main hand attack and an offhand attack. And it seems like they're kind of pairing these skills together quite a bit, so it'll be interesting to see how that works in builds in the future. But this kind of suits the idea of him being like a tanky mid-range character. These ones have a bit of range on them. You throw your Blessed Hammer, and you also charge up your shield and throw that, and that shield actually ricochets around enemies before returning back to you. And the shield actually leaves his arm as well. In this particular one, he actually charges up the actual shield and throws it, rather than just like throwing a spectral energy-based version of the shield. So I wonder what sort of ramifications that will have, whether you actually lose the shield's defensive capabilities then, or whether it's just an animation sort of thing. Next up, we got Fist of the Heavens. We got to have a look at it. It's an awesome looking skill that really suits the idea of this guy being a war machine, calling in these divine artillery strikes. They said that they designed this skill pretty much straight away, and they haven't made any changes to it since. It was just so awesome right from the outset, and it's pretty cool looking. It's kind of just like this crash of lightning with these little fizzles of lightning going out from the impact point, and looks like a lot of fun. Next up, we've got to look at Heaven's Fury, which was, they went through a few different designs. They initially had it kind of like a series of artillery strikes that followed your cursor around. Then they kind of had it like a beam that followed your cursor around, but they feel like this didn't really feel good, having a channeling ability for the Crusader. So the eventual design that's making it into the final game will be that you call it down and it acts independently, kind of like there's a holy spaceship up in the sky, you know, like a god channeling this lightning bolt sort of thing around the battlefield, frying enemies and things like that. And that'll look pretty cool as well. A lot of this stuff's pretty awesome looking. I'm very impressed with it. Next up, we've got to look at Steed Charge, which summons a short duration mount that you can use to charge through and damage enemies. So a bit of a mobility skill / damage dealing skill. And obviously, you know, having a weighty steed for this armored tank character is pretty important, I feel. And then we got to look at Falling Sword. This is by far my favorite skill. It's just so awesome and perfect for the Crusader. The Crusader himself actually becomes the bomb, teleporting himself up into the sky and then straight back down and crashing into enemies, exploding out in damage. And we got to see this in action in, like, there was some gameplay video. I'll probably play at the side of this video for you guys. And we got to see that in action, blowing up enemies. And this is probably going to be the one I'll want to create builds around. I see this sort of skill and I'm like, I want to make it so my character just uses that to get around and just blow everything up and have all my other skills support this skill. Looks awesome. And the idea of, you know, instead of giving the Crusader a gun, he becomes the gun or the bullet himself, and he just blows stuff up by teleporting himself around. I don't know, that's really, really cool. And then finally, we did get Blessed Hammer as a homage to the Crusader's Paladin roots, because the Crusader is kind of an evolution of the Paladin. So having the classic Diablo 2 style Blessed Hammer in there is a must, and I'm sure lots of people will be very pleased to see its return. So, after the Crusader, they gave us a brief look at the other classes. They talked about some hints on changes coming to the classes, and they gave us a look at one new skill each. There was hints there that there would only be one new skill per class, and not several. When we looked at the data mined information, they actually had several new skills per class, so these might have just been things they were testing out and actually aren't going into the final game, and maybe each class is just going to get one really good skill, but or maybe they just were only willing to show one skill in this. But the wording was kind of iffy, so I'm not too sure about that yet. They also talked about ensuring that a lot of changes they're making to the classes, because they are doing pretty much a balance and change pass over pretty much all of the skills of every class. And they're talking about ensuring that these bring each class back to its core design concept. So we talked about with the Crusader, making sure all his skills support his theme. They're trying to do that with all of the other classes. And in the current state of Diablo 3, this isn't quite the case, where some of the classes don't quite feel like their core design concept, and that's something they're looking to change. So first up, we took a look at the Barbarian, and they talked about his design. He's the strength and fury of the earth sort of class. But the problem is, his abilities like Earthquake and all that, they kind of just weren't used that much. Like, they just weren't that great. So they talked about they're going to be changing those and making them more impressive. They want this guy to be this hard-hitting, earth-crumbling, rock-shattering sort of character, and they're trying to do some changes to reflect that. Now, we also got, on that note, a look at his new skill called Avalanche, and this is a shout that causes a ton of rocks to fall down on his enemies, and certainly suits the theme of the class, and looks pretty cool. Next up, we took a look at the Wizard, and they wanted it to be a ranged character with strong elemental affinity. Currently, the Wizard is very strongly tied more to arcane power rather than elemental affinity, and this is something that's going to be changing. We've already seen in the data mine info that a lot of the skills are becoming more elemental focused, and they reiterated this in the panel today. They also showed off Frozen Orb, the new rune, and that's a callback to Diablo 2. And it looks pretty good. They actually showed like the old one in Diablo 2 and the new one in Diablo 3. So we're getting, the return of that classic skill, which I'm sure many people will be pleased about. And then the Wizard's new skill was Black Hole, which sucks in enemies from around the black hole and CCs them, probably also dealing damage. But this looks like it's going to be a very powerful and game-changing skill for the Wizard, because having the ability to group everything up and combine it with things like meteors or other AoE abilities is going to be very, very powerful, and also going to be a very strong CC when in a group and things like that as well. So that's going to be a very powerful skill, I think. It'll be interesting to see how people build around that. With the Monk, they talked about the Monk supposed to be this agile and fast-moving martial artist. It's supposed to be the fastest class in the game. That's what they want for the class. But currently that's not the case. Like the Barbarian has much faster move speed and gets around the battlefield quicker. And that's not what they want. They want the Monk to be that class. So they're doing some changes that they want it to be a lot faster, so they're changing a lot of skills to support that, allowing things like Dashing Strike to actually work as a movement skill, and giving a lot more teleports and things like that. So on that note, the Monk's new skill is Epiphany, and this it's a buff that allows every skill to teleport your character. So not just when you're using the Thunderclap rune or whatever it is, you're not just teleporting, then you're teleporting every single skill you use while you're under the effect of that buff. So obviously a bit of a build changing sort of buff there. And then next up, the Demon Hunter. They talked about with the Demon Hunter wanting to be this more trap and firepower based class, and that traps weren't really working like traps. People were kind of just using them as a weapon. So they talked about changing traps a little bit to make them act like traps, and something they did show off was this effect that allows traps to kind of taunt enemies to go towards them, so encourage them to actually work like traps, which is interesting and should work well as also a bit of a CC and crowd control, sort of ability there. And then we got a look at the newest skill for the Demon Hunter, which I'm very excited about. It's called Vengeance. It's a buff that you apply to your character while under the buff. Every single attack you do fires off extra missiles and side-mounted railgun-like attacks, and basically just ups your firepower to a huge degree. So really talking about making the Demon Hunter this very heavy firepower sort of character, which I think is really cool, and we'll bring it back to its theme a little bit more. So finally, there was the Witch Doctor. Apparently they're pretty happy with the class thematically, which I also agree with. It works a lot like it looks like, which is pretty cool. But they do want to strengthen the way damage over time effects work on the character, and also strengthen pet builds. So a lot of you guys that play Witch Doctor are looking out for those sorts of things. They do plan on doing something like that. They even kind of hinted at making a buff that allows your dots to last 5 minutes. So I don't know what that's all about, but sounds fun. And then finally, the new skill for the Witch Doctor revealed was an interesting one. Piranhas. This essentially acts as an amplified damage curse, so it's an AoE. Enemies caught in that AoE take extra damage from other skills. The skill itself doesn't seem to deal damage to them, but interesting. It certainly themes well to the Witch Doctor, but yeah, I don't know. It didn't feel like it had quite the impact. But then they showed off the Bogodile rune for this, which essentially causes enemies caught in this area of effect to be swallowed by a gigantic crocodile. And I thought that was pretty cool. That had the impact I was looking for from the initial skill. So runes can make some things a bit more interesting. But overall, pretty cool. Pretty excited about the changes. Interested that they only showed off one new skill for each class, and interested to see whether they plan on adding more. But if it's just one really cool new skill per class and a bunch of changes, I'd still be happy with that, especially because we're going to have the Crusader to play around with as well. But I'm very impressed with the shape of the Crusader. So in the next video, I'll be talking about the itemization changes, the Loot 2.0, and the new crafting and stuff like that. So make sure to stick around for that, and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm Ziggy D, and thanks for watching.